and welcome this morning. My name is Marie Hutchison. I have the honor of serving as the creative specialist for the Bishop Bruce O. Innovation Center at United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio, and partnering with the director, Sue Nilsson-Kibbe. It's an absolute privilege of the Innovation Center to team up with the BMCR to bring the third Laity Leadership Institution course, Charter for Racial Justice, with Judge John Gray to you this morning. I'd like to begin with a word of prayer. Let's pray. As we begin our time together, Father God, we thank you for this incredible opportunity. We ask that you open our hearts and minds for what you will share through Judge John Gray and with all of us today. We thank you and praise you for all the amazing ways you are working in us and through us. And it's in Jesus' name we pray, and together we say, Amen. At this time, Amen. At this time, I'd like to welcome Dr. Yvette Richards, and she will be serving as our host today. Dr. Yvette, would you be so kind as to share more about the BMCR and also introduce for us Judge John Gray?
Thank you so very much. I am just delighted and want to say thank you to Reverend Sue Kibbe and you, Maria, and the Innovation Center. We are so grateful for this partnership that started to allow us an opportunity to have a platform across the United States and the world where Black Methodists for Church Renewal laity can come together and learn and to be able to fellowship and gain a greater understanding in areas where we were able to assist our pastors and our congregation along with the community. So Black Methodists for Church Renewal is a organization that stands up for the injustice for people of color. It stands for righteousness, and it stands to be in support of clergy and laity in the movement of Jesus Christ. I am delighted today to serve as our advocacy chair for our national board, also serving as the South Central Jurisdiction Coordinator. We are delighted today and pleased that we have one of the most esteemed leaders of laity in the Black church, period. Today we have retired Judge John Gray, who knows firsthand the behind the scenes, the inner working, and the passion behind the Charter for Racial Justice. Not only does he have a distinguished career in the legal mind, but also he is the son of the creator, the mover and shaker, and the foundation in which the Charter for Racial Justice was created, developed, and still to this day, a center point in the work that we do around being inclusive, diverse, and welcoming of all of God's children. With that being said, it gives me great pleasure and honor to introduce to you our speaker, our presenter, our teacher, our insightful and informational host today, retired Judge John Gray, a powerful man, a witness for Jesus Christ, and a person that I love to call a friend. Judge John Gray.
Thank you, Dr. Richards. And I'll talk a little bit more about that introduction in a minute. Greetings, friends. Thank you for joining us today. Back in, I can't remember the month, but it was earlier this year, Dr. Richards asked me if I would be willing to come with you and talk about the Charter for Racial Justice. And without thinking, I said yes. And as the date has drawn nearer, I've wondered what I got myself into. But I can assure you I'll do the very best that I can. Black Methodists for Church Renewal was founded in 1968 at the time when our church was experiencing a new expression. You recall that 1968 was the uniting conference of the Methodist Church, and the Evangelical United Brethren to form the United Methodist Church. And based upon the church's history, there was a great deal of angst over what this new expression was going to mean. And as a consequence, two things happened that relate specifically to the church's history with respect to race. A General Commission on Religion and Race was formed as a general agency of the church. And in addition to that, Black Methodists for Church Renewal was formed as an advocacy group. I can't say that I was at the table when BMCR was birthed, but I guess I could say I was at the children's table around that time when I began to hear the elders, the pastors, the prominent lay people begin to talk about Black Methodists for Church Renewal and the role that it would play in this new expression of Methodism. So we'll talk about that as a backdrop for leading to a discussion of the Charter for Racial Justice. Before we do that, I need to vent a little bit. I was involved in an unprecedented event during the week of September 18 to September 22. And that event was a church trial of a sitting bishop that took place in Glenview, Illinois, outside Chicago. For those of you who are clergy, the trial took place at the West Path building, formerly known as the General Commission on Pension and Health Benefits. But West Path hosted us. They were very gracious hosts. There were a number of people from around the country that attended because it was a public trial. It was live streamed across the country because there were people who wanted to at least see what was going on. And I was part of Bishop Carcaño's defense team. Under the Book of Discipline, a pastor who's being brought to trial is entitled to a counsel and an assistant counsel. The counsel must be an ordained member of a conference. The assistant counsel may be an attorney, but that attorney has to function without voice. This all began in March of last year when complaints were filed against Bishop Carcaño, and the supervisory process, the administrative process, and eventually a judicial process ensued. I was asked as part of the supervisory process to provide at least some advice, guidance, and counsel for Bishop Carcaño. There were others from around the country as well that formed that support team for her. But to make a long story short, it ended up with 4 charges, and I believe it's 29 specifications within those charges. This is the first time in over 100 years that a bishop of our church or any of our predecessor denominations had been brought up on charges and brought to trial. There have been charges against bishops, but none have ever gone so far as a trial. What we know now, since as I said, it was a public trial, the charges were 1, disobedience to the order and discipline of the United Methodist Church. 2, relationships that undermine the ministry of another pastor. 3, harassment. including racial or sexual harassment. And the fourth charge was fiscal malfeasance. I won't get into the details of what the specifications were because all of the charges, the bishop was found not guilty of all of the charges and all of the specifications. And similar to a civil trial, a trial is conducted with a jury. And the jury is made up of members of the ordained clergy. They could be deacons, they could be elders. And those jurors are selected from a panel recommended by the bishops of the specific jurisdiction in which the trial takes place. Interesting twist, Bishop Carcaño is a member of the Western jurisdiction, and her support team believed that she could not get a fair trial in the Western jurisdiction. And so we asked under a disciplinary provision for a change of venue. And we believe that the change of venue gave us truly an unbiased and impartial jury panel from which to select the final jurors. The trial is led by a presiding officer. In this case, it was a retired bishop. And we were sent, upon his order, we were sent to the North Central jurisdiction for trial. Each bishop within the North Central jurisdiction recommended a certain number of people as potential jurors. We had to have 35 in order to select a jury of 13 members with 2 alternates. Once we get a panel of 35, the jurors are then selected by lot. And literally, numbers are pulled out of a hat, or in this case, a basket, and those become the members of the jury panel. And so then the counsel for the church puts on evidence. Counsel for the respondent, Bishop Carcaño, had the opportunity to put on evidence. And then the jury went out and made a decision. And as I said earlier, the decision was that she was not guilty on all of the charges and all of the specifications. At the conclusion of the trial, the presiding officer, who was Bishop Al Gwynn, talked about what's expected of Christian leaders. In fact, what's expected of all Christians. And he expressed regret that the problems that led to complaints, that led to charges, ended up in a church trial. The discipline says church trials are an expedient of last resort. And so every effort should be made in order to avoid going to trial of any sort that has to do with whether it's a bishop or whether it's a pastor, whatever it is. Trials are an expedient of last resort. And the time, the expense, the delay, the loss of leadership from a very esteemed bishop of our church are all very regrettable. I should say, because I didn't at the beginning, and I said it started in March of last year. Well, it was at that time that Bishop Carcaño was suspended from all episcopal duties, and even to the extent that she was not supposed to even enter a Methodist church or discharge any of her episcopal duties in any sort. Once she was suspended, the supervisory process then proceeded and of course, thankfully ended in a not guilty verdict. I want to see if anyone has any questions about that, because I'm going to move to another topic more central to what we're convened for today. But since this was such a rare event, I want to try and answer any questions that anyone may have at this point. I don't see anyone unmuting.
And I'm monitoring the chat, Judge Gray. I don't see any questions at this time.
All right. I did ask Dr. Richards to post a couple of articles. One that was in the United Methodist News from when the trial began, and the second one from United Methodist News when the trial concluded. And I'll keep talking until she finds those. But if you do not subscribe to the United Methodist News Daily Bulletin, I suggest that every member of our denomination should, because it gives a global perspective on things that are going on within our denomination. It talks about missional priorities. It talks about people doing things in innovative ways. And my hope is that you'll take the opportunity to subscribe. There's no cost to subscribe. It's a daily email that comes out, and I believe there's a weekly recap that also comes out. During the spring and summer, most there's the link. Can you open the link so that people can see the news story? If not, we'll move on. I'll conclude by saying the United
Yes, I could open it. Just
right.
one moment, Judge.
I'll keep talking. The United Methodist News Service is something to which you should subscribe to learn about the work of the church, not only here in the United States, but globally. And in the spring and summer, typically there are recaps and reports of the meetings of annual conferences across the country, so that you can see what they're concerned with and the programs and ideas that they're bringing forward. I think we've got our news story. That's the second news story. Church court finds bishop not guilty. The photo that you see is the moment that the presiding officer was reading the jury's verdict. She was not guilty on all 4 of the charges and all 29 specifications. If you scroll down some more, of course, there's some text of the story. There's some key points that the jury found her not guilty. The bishop found great joy, and she was concerned at that point of how we begin healing. As we scroll down, there was the presiding officer, Bishop Gwynn, as he was doing the prayer of dismissal. One thing about that, it was strange to me. Nobody prayed until the end. I thought we would at least start with the prayer of the trial, but the trial proceeded, and he prayed at the end after his comments. I think there's one more picture. That's Bishop Carcano hugging a supporter, and the United Methodist News Service asked us after the verdict if we would be willing to talk and answer questions about the proceeding, about the ordeal that not only Bishop Carcano, but even the complainants have been through for the last 19 months. With the not guilty verdict, the bishop is no longer subject to suspension and is free to return to her episcopal duties. I have to believe that there will be a lot of healing that has to take place, but we will continue to hold Bishop Carcano and the entire Western jurisdiction in our prayers as we proceed. I should mention that Bishop Carcano is the first Latina bishop elected in our church. She was elected in 2004 by the Western jurisdiction and has served the Desert Southwest Conference, the Phoenix area, the Los Angeles area, and the San Francisco area as well. So thank you for posting that, Dr. Richards. As we move on to talk about the Charter for Racial Justice, I believe that it's very important to understand something of the backdrop that we experienced as a denomination leading up to the adoption of the various iterations of the Charter for Racial Justice policies that eventually was adopted as the Charter for Racial Justice. And I'm going to recommend 3 books that I used as resource material to learn more and more about the backdrop. The first book was Methodism's Racial Dilemma, which is the story of the central jurisdiction. It was written by Bishop James S. Thomas, and it was published in 1992, I believe. All of these books are still available, as I understand, through Amazon or perhaps through other secondary used book markets. Methodism's Racial Dilemma is where I'll start, because it talks about the story of the central jurisdiction. We all know that Methodism has had a number of expressions. The Methodist Episcopal Church, we'll start there. It split over the issue of slavery in 1844. And so there was the Methodist Episcopal Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church South. The Methodist Episcopal Church South left the denomination over the issue of slavery, or what some people call the issue of states' rights, the issue of their ability to pursue a living in the way in which they preferred to pursue a living, and if that meant that they had uncompensated labor from people who were enslaved, that was consistent with their Christian beliefs. We always hear the reference to slaves obey your masters. That is included in the Bible. Well, some saw that as a justification for the institution of slavery. What I will call the North Church, not so much. And so the denomination split. What that meant was that there were some churches, even within the same city or locality, that belonged to different denominations expressive of Methodism. There are 2 large churches in Tulsa that sit right across the street from each other. One was Methodist Episcopal Church, the other is Methodist Episcopal Church South. And that continued up until the early part of the 20th century. Now, in addition to those 2 denominations, there was the Methodist Protestant Church that we don't know a whole lot about, that I don't know a whole lot about, but it was an expression of Methodism. And even today, there are other expressions of Methodism. You have the AME, African Methodist Episcopal, CME, Christian Methodist Episcopal, AME Zion. Those are predominantly Black expressions of Methodism. And there's also a Free Methodist movement that we hear less about than the other denominations. But the Free Methodists still exist. And from what I understand, some of their stands on social issues are in conflict with the stands on social issues of United Methodists. And so, although there are opportunities to fellowship, we are not of the same denomination. So the story of the central jurisdiction starts in 1939 Before that, excuse me. Before that, in the early part of the 20th century, talks began among the varying expressions of Methodism about reunification. And reunification took place in 1939, right here in Kansas City. There was a uniting conference that took place at the Municipal Auditorium, what is now the Municipal Auditorium. And the uniting conference is the start of the central jurisdiction. Now, prior to 1939, none of the Methodist expressions had what we now call jurisdictions or central conferences. None of the expressions of Methodism had a judicial council. And as a part of the plan of reunification, a jurisdictional system was brought into being. The jurisdictional came from geographic locations, the Western jurisdiction, South Central, where I am, North Central, Northeast, and Southeast were the 5 jurisdictions in the United States. Outside the United States, there are what are called central conferences. And there are central conferences in Africa, central conferences in Western Europe, central conferences in the Philippines. So the jurisdiction is sort of an autonomous, to some extent, an autonomous entity based on geography. I should say that Black people were part of the Methodist movement from the very beginning. The Christmas conference that took place in 1784, Black people were present at the Christmas conference and were part of Methodism's movement in the United States. We began to see what I guess I'll call fissures in that unity. We all know the story of Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, who were worshiping at a white Methodist church, who knelt down at the altar for prayer and were removed from the church bodily. Well, Richard Allen left and formed the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Absalom Jones affiliated with the Episcopal Church, what we now call Episcopalian. And they continued their Christian journey in different expressions of Methodism. But there are a number of people who chose to stay. And some authors have called that group who stayed the faithful remnant. So Bishop Thomas's book about the story of the central jurisdiction is one of the sources that I read. I'm going to go now to the map I sent you, Dr. Richards, to talk about this central jurisdiction. It might help to know a little more about me. I'm a preacher's kid, and so I grew up in United Methodist parsonages and United Methodist parsonages all my life. So much so that I didn't realize at the time that I was part of a church within a church. That is, the central jurisdiction was separate from the other conferences, even the churches down the street. And so sometimes when I would pass by Trinity Methodist Church or St. John Methodist Church, because I didn't know who they were, we didn't fellowship with them, they didn't fellowship with us, I always thought that they were some other kind of Methodist, like AME or CME. I didn't realize that we were all part of the same, what was then called the Methodist Church. And we were part of this, what's called a central jurisdiction. because the price of reunification was to separate people of color from the remaining conferences. And so while there was a Missouri East and a Missouri West conference, members of the central jurisdiction were not part of Missouri East or Missouri West. They were part of some non-geographic conference. We were in what was called the Central West Conference. And as you can see, Central West took up part of Illinois, Missouri, all of Kansas, Colorado, Nebraska. The legislation provided for the Central West to have jurisdiction of churches in North South Dakota and on out to Wyoming. I never knew of any Black churches in North or South Dakota or Wyoming, but that was still part of the Central West Conference. Well, those conferences, if you took them geographically, you've got now what are some 6 or 7 conferences based upon geography. There are some conferences that encompass 2 states, like the Dakotas, and one conference that's Kansas and Nebraska in the South Central jurisdiction. So in order to accommodate what was then called the Negro work of the church, we were all put into this central jurisdiction. And the central jurisdiction had its own structures, had its own bishops, because it wasn't until 1972 that Black bishops were assigned to the geographic or predominantly Anglo conferences. So this is the world that I knew, that the church was greatly segregated by race, and that was just the fact of life. You can see on the west part of the map, the part with the lines, the diagonal lines, that's mostly what we think of today as the Western jurisdiction. And the anomaly in all of this is that there were Black churches in what's now the Western jurisdiction, but they were never part of the central jurisdiction. They were included in the work of the Anglo, the white conferences, and it's still true that the Western part of our denomination does stuff differently than the other parts. So one of the things that was beneficial, and I say that with air quotes around it, beneficial about this central jurisdiction, this segregation of members into a racially segregated structure, was that because we had our own structures, our own boards, our own bishops, our own district superintendents, and even our own lay organizations, it gave people the opportunity to learn leadership skills. And the description and account of the Uniting Conference tells the story that of the 46 delegates of color at the conference, there were 34 that voted against the plan of union and 11 who abstained from voting on the plan of union. And the accounts and reports of the Uniting Conference say that at the moment that unification was announced, the conference stood and spontaneously began to sing, "We're Marching to Zion." These resources, Bishop Thomas's book tells us that while others stood and sang, those Black delegates sat and some wept. But believing in the ultimate triumph of Christ's kingdom, people entered into this segregated church on the belief that one day our church would no longer be segregated. I'm going to go to Heritage and Hope now, Dr. Richards, because that's one of the other resources that I relied upon. Heritage and Hope was written around the same time that Methodism's Racial Dilemma was written. And Heritage and Hope is a combination of essays on the African American presence in United Methodism. And so it talks about our presence at the beginning, the central jurisdiction, with less thoroughness than Bishop Thomas's book, and what we hope to accomplish into the future. And there are a number of very prominent thought leaders within Black Methodism who have contributed to the essays contained in Heritage and Hope. So I recommend that to you as well. That brings us up to 1968. 1968 was when the Methodist Church merged with a denomination called the Evangelical United Brethren Church to become the United Methodist Church. And one of the key aspects of the merger plan was that the Evangelical United Brethren, for short, I'll call them EUB, the EUB Church would not participate in unification if there were still racial structures in our church. And so in the years leading up to 1968, Bishop Thomas's book talks about this extensively. The adoption of Amendment 9 to the Constitution and putting in place what was called a Committee of Five. There were five prominent people from the central jurisdiction that began to map out a plan for elimination of racially segregated conferences so that Black churches could then be admitted into the conferences in their geographic area. And that plan was finally adopted, and the reunification, not reunification, the uniting conference of the Methodist Church and the Evangelical United Brethren took place in 1968. So 1844, the Methodist Episcopal Church splits into a North expression and a South expression. 1939, the Methodist Church North, the Methodist Church South, and the Methodist Protestant Church all joined together to become the Methodist Church. 1968, merger with Evangelical United Brethren to become the United Methodist Church. The story of the central jurisdiction is one that some of us continue to live over and over, because in many instances we still see expressions of discrimination, racial segregation, and the existence of racism within the structures of our church. And we still long for the day when those vestiges of those systems are no longer with us. It's said that we are a church of three different books. The Bible is one book. The Book of Discipline is another book. And there's another book that is talked about less frequently, although it does not have the force of law. It's called the Book of Resolutions, where the church has set out its social principles, what the church believes on a wide variety of topics, not only racism, but family, marriage, economic systems. All of those things are covered within the Book of Resolutions. And so I would encourage you, it's available online for free. I would encourage you to seek out the Book of Resolutions in order to understand more about what the church believes. So I talked about my interest in church, my upbringing in segregated church, our integration into a new expression of Methodism, and what I've come to learn and understand about our continuing struggle. There are a number of things that could be said about history. One of the things I like to say about history, I wish I had thought of this, is that life is lived looking forward, but can only be understood looking backwards. And one of the things that stems from that is that another wise man said, those who fail to learn the lessons of history will be doomed to repeat the mistakes of history. And some people say that history repeats itself. I don't know that it always repeats itself, but it sometimes rhymes. And we see things that look familiar from something we've seen before. We all know that the great commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and that the second great commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. The service of word and table that we use calls us to confess, among other things, that we have not loved our neighbor as ourselves. And the simple truth is that our church has, in too many instances, done real harm. But let me make one thing clear. No one on this call is responsible for the history of our church or the history of our country. But all of us are responsible to learn that history and to live into the promise on which the church is built, to live into what Dr. King called a beloved community, where we truly see ourselves as interdependent. So the second book we saw, I'm going to show the third book now, because that begins to take us into the topic that we're really focused on today. And I found this book. It's entitled The Fellowship of Love, Methodist Women Changing American Racial Attitudes. And it goes from 1920 to 1968. And those are real critical years, because a number of things were transpiring in our nation and indeed within our church during that period of time. And when I said earlier that the talks about reunification began in the early 20th century, that's true. It was not consummated until 1939, as I mentioned. But in the background, there was a group that was constantly stirring the pot in terms of America's racial attitudes, racial policies. And of course, those attitudes and policies were expressed also within our institutions, not least of all our church. And so if you really want to know more about how the women of our church had a profound influence on dragging the church farther and farther into the 20th century and even into the 21st century, all three of these books I recommend, but this one, The Fellowship of Love, I recommend most highly because it relates more directly to the Charter for Racial Justice. And there's another tool that I found, which is called the Racial Justice Timeline. And I'm going to ask Dr. Richards to pull up the Racial Justice Timeline. I'm not going to use the whole timeline. I'm going to use the timeline basically primarily for the 1968 to 1978 timeframe. But there are some interesting things that we need to understand. This racial justice timeline can be found online under United Women in Faith, formerly known as United Methodist Women. Dr. Richards, I don't know why you all changed the name. It was fine the way it was, but I guess all things must change. I'm going to go to page 11. But on the left, you see things that were happening in the United States, and on the right, you see things that were happening led by women in the United Methodist tradition. We're not going to talk about the 1800s, but we will talk about 1920. Remember, 1920 was when the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was adopted that gave women the right to vote. We see this instance of Carrie Parks Johnson, who was a Southern woman of the Women's Missionary Council. She was named to the Commission on Race Relationships, which was designed to develop ways for Black and white women to work together. Okay, so early in the 20th century, there were people who thought that we need to extend ourselves to our brothers and sisters of color. And so there were people beginning to talk about these things. I think the next, I have mine right here, and I'll tell you where I want to go. I want to go, 1920, 26 on the previous page was when a joint venture began that resulted in the organization of Bennett College in North Carolina, a women's college or an HBCU for young women. It was a joint venture between the Women's Home Missionary Society and the Board of Education of the church. So people were beginning to talk about things. I'll go to 1939, which again was the Uniting Conference and the Reunification Conference, as opposed to the Uniting Conference. And it's in 1939 that there were 3 different women's organizations formed under the umbrella of the Methodist Church. There was the Women's Society of Christian Service, the Wesleyan Service Guild, and the women's division of the Christian Service were formed. And 1939, it references the establishment of the central jurisdiction at the Uniting Conferences, where the 3 branches then of Methodism chose to come back together to form the Methodist Church. I'll go to 1940, when there's a woman by the name of Thelma Stevens, who became the head of Christian social relations of this newly formed church. And she was interested in writing the first version, what was called the Charter for Racial Policies, in 1952. And she was an outspoken critic of segregation in the church. The African-American women that were in the segregated central jurisdiction maintained their commitment to fully integrated organizations by welcoming women of all races to their events. And so slowly, this pot began to boil. The Charter for Racial Justice Policies talked about things such as hiring, the Charter of Racial Policies, I should call it, hiring, employment. They had positions on housing, education, all of these things moving toward what they believed should be a society where everyone is treated the same. You see, in 1941, the Women's Division of Christian Service adopted a policy that said they could only hold their meetings in places where all members could stay without any form of racial discrimination. I talked about the Central West Conference earlier. One of the things about the Central West Conference is that whenever conference took place, people who came from St. Louis or who came from Denver or who came from Omaha, wherever they came from, they were housed with members of local churches, because from the very beginning, their members could not stay in hotels. They were not permitted to stay in hotels. And so there was always a host church. You couldn't go out to a restaurant and order dinner. And so all the meals were taken at that host church. And what that meant was people in other parts of the conference became acquainted with one another. And it didn't matter that you lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, or if you lived in Springfield, Missouri, or Pueblo, Colorado. When you went to conference, you got to stay with someone. And when conference came to you, you opened your home to someone. And I can remember one of my visits to Union Memorial in St. Louis some years ago. One of the members asked about one of the members of Union asked about one of the members at Centennial, because they had that type of relationship. They had stayed with each other when they were delegates to the Central West Conference. So these things were beginning to bubble up in some aspects of our church. You see, in 1942, there was an incident where the National Assembly, Dr. Richards has led one of those. The National Assembly moved its conference from St. Louis to Columbus, Ohio, because St. Louis hotels would not accommodate Black women. And there's those types of stands. Now, you may wonder why these things were not very effective on the whole church. Well, you remember, up until 1920, women couldn't vote. And it was still a number of years before women could even enter the process to become ordained. And so as long as the women kind of stayed to themselves and did their own little meetings by themselves, it was okay. But as we say sometimes, don't be bringing that over here. And so that was kind of the church's attitude. So under 1948, we see more evidence of women's division and central jurisdiction women collaborating. They talked about legislation for the improvement of living standards for farm workers and domestic servants. People talk about the great thing that Social Security was. Well, the way Social Security was adopted as part of the New Deal, the Southern representatives and senators did not want farm workers or domestic servants to be included in Social Security. And so it was a long time before farm workers and domestic servants became a part of the Social Security system. But that was an instance in which the women of our church spoke out. And remember what else was going on. Across the page in the blue section, President Truman ordered the military desegregated. And he also entered an executive order about hiring in civil service and in government contract. So these things were developing. If my old friend Buck O'Neill were here, he would talk about Jackie Robinson breaking the color line in Major League Baseball, and how that even that was a civil rights achievement. But we go down to 1951. We have Pauli Murray's book, State Laws on Race and Color. That book became part of the case strategy of Brown versus Board of Education. And up to 1952, when the Charter for Racial Policies were adopted by the Women's Division of Christian Service. So we start there. In 1962, the Charter for Racial Policies was revised. and you see a new charter for racial policies is adopted by the Women's Division, and it was later adopted by the General Conference. And as we began to have these discussions about how do we eliminate racial structures, how do we expand to include our EUB brothers and sisters, these discussions about race became more central to the discussion of the church overall. And you see there in 63, the Charter for the United Nations was dedicated in 1963 in New York City, and ecumenical women and Methodist women led the effort to provide seminars for national and international issues. In 64, the School of Christian Missions would become regional schools, not just conferences, and it would be organized on a cross-jurisdictional basis so that Black women and white women, women of Hispanic descent, Native American women could all attend schools of missions together. And as that began to proliferate around the country, the discussion about how do we become a truly integrated church continued in the background. So we come forward to 1968 when the three organizations, Women's Society of Christian Service, Wesleyan Service Guild, all merged into what became United Methodist Women. And I guess one of the reasons why I am interested in this stuff is that my mother was very involved in Women's Society and later United Methodist Women. She was invited to be a part of the committee that planned out the structure of United Methodist Women, because the other organizations were going to go away and there would be one organization, United Methodist Women. So she was part of the committee that helped draft the organizational plan for that. And so in 1972, we see the three organizations combined to form one inclusive organization in the new United Methodist Church. And it talked about the election process for board structure. In 73, the long range planning for total ministry of the Women's Division, and the globalization, I'll call it, of United Methodist Women, Women's Division of the Board of Global Ministries, talked about inclusion of women from all across Methodism. And so we come up to 1976. That's my mom, who you see pictured there. She was the first African-American president of the Women's Division, which also made her president of United Methodist Women. And by that time, all of the conferences of the old central jurisdiction had been merged into geographic conferences. The United Methodist Women were getting up and going, and the third iteration of the Charter for Racial Policies took place under my mom's presidency, that was called the Charter for Racial Justice. And it was adopted in 1977, in 1978, and subsequently it was adopted by the General Conference. So 1980, I talked about the Book of Resolutions. You will find the Charter for Racial Justice included in the Book of Resolutions under paragraph 3371. It talks about Charter for Racial Justice in an Interdependent Global Community. So thank you, Dr. Richards. You read my mind. This is what we came to talk about. So all of that is prelude to what we're about to talk about. And this is the Charter for Racial Justice in an Interdependent Global Community. God is the creator of all people. We're all God's children in one family. Racism is a rejection of the teachings of Jesus Christ. Racism denies the redemption and reconciliation of Jesus Christ. And so we see at the very beginning that this issue of racism is front and center of the Charter for Racial Justice. And if we call ourselves Jesus-loving Christians, then we need to be concerned about the plight of our brothers and sisters, not only in terms of racism, but also in terms of access to healthcare, access to education, even access to water in some parts of our denomination, some parts of the world within our denomination, economic justice, the existence of I can't think of the correct term. Domestic violence is what I'm thinking of, but there's another term for it that I would prefer to use. So that racism robs all human beings of their wholeness and is used as a justification for exploitation of the sorts that are listed there. That's part of the Charter for Racial Justice. So bear in mind that many of these instances from 1939 up to 1968, things were happening that we just take for granted now. In 1939, when the three branches of Methodism reunited, there were some branches of Methodism that recognized female clergy. Well, at 1939, they lost their recognition. And it took a lot of years before the church began to recognize that women had a rightful call on the call to preach the gospel. In the Central West Conference, there were women clergy. That it was nothing unusual. I guess I have to say there weren't that many, but there were some. And they were always called, I can remember the woman's name. She was always called Reverend Mrs. Elzora Roberson. But the men were not called Reverend Mr. They were just called Reverend. So there was even a distinction made where perhaps we shouldn't have. It talks about our common humanity, the strength of our society being in racial and cultural diversity, and a struggle for justice must be based on new attitudes, new understandings, and new relationships. Those are the things that were part of the preamble. And so there were also some action items under the therefore, as we see. Elimination of all forms of institutional racism in the total ministry of the church. That's the racial dilemma that Bishop Thomas was talking about when he wrote his book on the central jurisdiction. To create opportunities to deal with existing racist attitudes and social distance between members. Increase efforts to recruit persons of all races into the membership of our church. To establish educational opportunities, workshops, and seminars to study, understand, and appreciate the historical and cultural contributions of each race to the church. You know, that's a very difficult part because many people, not just in our church, but throughout our society, want to make it difficult to learn our history. Our history is like the movie, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so there were a number of things that took place that many of us don't know about because those histories are sometimes suppressed. But I suggest, as I suggested early on, that if we don't learn those lessons of past history, we're likely to repeat those mistakes in our past history. And so education is key. Learning is key. Here's one other thing I learned from another resource that I didn't rely upon so much. But it's important to read the histories and the accounts of Black scholars, Black Methodist scholars from back in those times. Before the Uniting Conference in 1939, the Methodist Protestant Church was in the process of discussing full inclusion. And of course, when we got to 1939, that was a bargaining chip that got given away. And so it was a long time before Black Methodists were included in the total structure of the church. In 1968, when the EUB church insisted upon the elimination of all racial structures. The structures were eliminated, but there's still a lot of work to do on the attitudes, beliefs, and application of power to those structures. Let me see, number 6, work for the development and implementation of national and international policies to protect the rights of all people, support, participate in worldwide struggle for liberation, and facilitate nomination and election process. That was very important because if you're not at the table when decisions are made, then your point of view is not represented in the final outcome. So it talks about full inclusion. When the Uniting Conference took place in 1968, there was a provision to ensure that the former EUB members would be fairly represented on boards and commissions. And in fact, there was established a quota system that every board had to have so many EUBs. Well, much of my adult life, the word quota has been a dirty word, at least when it's applied to Black people being represented. That back then it was part of the structure. And over time, we become less and less aware of who used to be an EUB. I couldn't point to one if I had to right now, because we're all part of this, 50 plus years later, we're all part of this United Methodist Church. I feel obliged to make a comment about the experience that our church is having now with disaffiliations. There's been, again, a discussion bubbling up ever since 1972, when the church stated as part of its social principles that we view the practice of homosexuality as inconsistent with Christian teaching. And some of our LGBT brothers and sisters have experienced pain over that. And every 4 years we go through this thing about do we change or retain the language in the discipline? Well, up to this point, it's been retained. But at the special General Conference in 2019, the General Conference created a method by which congregations that conscientiously disagreed would be able to leave the denomination and, based upon some formula, would be able to keep their property. Remember, all Methodist property is held in trust for the denomination. And so even though your grandmother sewed the curtains in the church doesn't belong to you. The church belongs to the greater denomination. And so the issue of being able to take property with them was always a sticking point. Here's what I see. And I said earlier, maybe history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. What some people thought would happen is that the more progressive churches would leave the denomination. And what I see happening is that the more conservative churches are leaving the denomination over the issue of human sexuality. In fact, many of the churches had to say it out loud. We're leaving because we disagree with the church's view of human sexuality. The majority of the disaffiliations that have taken place in my interpretation of the data, the majority of the churches that are leaving are those churches that were part of the Methodist Episcopal Church South. And so this social issue, again, is raising its head, and a split. It's not really a split. Some people call it a splintering of the United Methodist Church is in the process taking place. And as I understand, Missouri Conference is going to have a special session to approve a number of disaffiliations because the disaffiliation legislation expires at the end of this year. And those who haven't chosen to take advantage of the process will have to use some other process that I understand is a lot more expensive. So this whole thing about societal changes, societal growth, I have to give credit to what I've come to know as United Methodist Women as having led on this issue for a very long time. From the first Charter for Racial Policies in 1952, the revision of those policies in 1968, and the formal adoption of the Charter for Racial Justice that took place in 78, 79 by the Women's Division, and was subsequently adopted by the General Conference held in 1980. And because it was adopted into the General Conference, it was adopted by the General Conference of 1980, it's now part of the Book of Resolutions that I talked about earlier. So what I hope that we've been able to do is to open ourselves to hearing some of the church's less glorious moments, to help understand the harm that was done, and to begin to think strategically about how we complete the task of bringing about a truly inclusive church. Now, this graphic that I have put up here, I don't know exactly where this came from, but I began to hear that some UMW groups had what they called a May Gray Charter for Racial Justice Club. And I began to hear about this from groups around the country after my mom passed away in 2010. And so to take the issue further, to bring it, as they say, down home, there are May Gray Charter for Racial Justice clubs around the country. And I came across this from 2020, I believe, that show the criteria that give people a roadmap as to how to live out the principles contained in the Charter for Racial Justice. It talks about movies that we should see. It talks about publications that we should read. And it's not just about Black Methodists, it's about all Methodists of varying cultural and ethnic groups. so that we can begin to understand the struggles that other people have had, the experiences that other people have, because many of the things that happen are not because people are mean-spirited, although it may have seemed that way, but because they have a limited vision of what the world is. I told a fellow one time, I went to school with you, but you never came home with me, because there's a whole different type of experience that we have. You know, going to school together, we all learn the same thing. But it's difficult for people to understand how racial animus, racial discrimination, racial prejudice can be manifested, that in some people's minds is the natural order of things. And so beginning to break down those systems that we call the natural order of things helps us to move toward the point of being more inclusive, you know, as the song says, more loving, more like Jesus, all these things that we say and sing on Sunday, but we have to find real ways in which to bring ourselves to a point of living those out fully. I've talked a long time, and I could talk a long time more about this, because really, this is a major part of my life's history. And I guess one day I'll be forgiven for that. But I'm still part of this church, because it's mine just as much as it is anyone else's. And in order to bring about, again, what King called the beloved community, we've still got a lot of work to do in order to become a truly inclusive church and a reflection of what we think heaven is. I'm sure I'll think of something else more I want to say, but I want to pause and provide an opportunity in case anyone has a question or a comment. I saw there were a couple of people who made chat comments. I invite you to talk about your experiences that you chatted about.
Before we do that, as y'all are, yes, as y'all prepare to ask retired Judge John Ray those questions, I do want everyone to be aware that the United Women in Faith group as a whole this year is focusing on the Charter for Racial Justice for our quadrennial meetings across the United States. And so we will be having roundtable discussion with our bishops on how are you leading your conference and including the laity in the work that needs to be done, and also utilizing and bringing back up the Charter for Racial Justice, which gives us clear point information. Several units are doing the May grade for Charter for Racial Justice criteria, especially in the Missouri Annual Conference. Ours is named the May grade Charter for Racial Justice because she is ours. And so we utilize that information to move the work forward. And like Judge Gray said, everybody has a role to play. We cannot sit back and wait for someone else to take the responsibility. We have the work, we're doing the work, and we hope that everybody will join in and bring the charter to life in your area and in your community. Thank you, Judge.
Okay. Any comments or questions? I'm going to brag on Dr. Richards here for a moment. Dr. Richards served a term as the international president of United Methodist Women. Well, I think Carolyn Johnson was the Black president before you. She was the second. My mother was the first. And so Carolyn Johnson, who's from Indiana, grew up like I did in Central Jurisdiction, and down to the youth organizations. We had opportunities to learn how to be leaders, to learn how to comply with disciplinary provisions, to learn how to run a meeting and those types of things. And so I have to brag on Dr. Yvette, because she is the embodiment of what my mother learned and what Carolyn Johnson learned along the way, in addition to the other presidents as well. And so when we talk about the great cloud of witnesses, they're cheering us on still. And the work that we have to do, we have to make a proud account of ourselves as well as we continue. I'll say this because tomorrow is World Communion Sunday. And churches ask people for a second mile gift to support crusade scholarships. The Board of Global Ministries offers crusade scholarships in order to assist people who are trying to pursue advanced education. I was a crusade scholar, and crusade scholarships paid my way through law school. And so I always try and mention this because churches still ask, why do we have to pay benevolences? Well, we pay benevolences in order to help people around the world. And some of those people from around the world are in your very church. They're not around the world, they're around the corner, or they're in the next pew. And so because I had the benefit and the blessing of a crusade scholarship that got me through law school, I feel as though I owe a debt of service. And I guess that's why I said yes to Dr. Richards, not knowing what all the work I'd have to do. And why I said yes to supporting Bishop Carcaño in her time of need. There's been one other bishop. He wasn't brought up on charges, but a committee tried to retire him involuntarily. And I was able to help him get reinstated as an active bishop. And so I see these as opportunities to serve the church, not necessarily agreeing with the church and what it's trying to do, but doing what I believe to be the right thing in that particular circumstance. Bishop Bledsoe had been bishop for 4 years, and two people came to him, a preacher and a layperson came to him and said, "We want you to retire because you're a bad bishop." And so they engineered a palace coup, I called it, to retire him involuntarily, and got the jurisdictional conference to go along with it. Well, I was able to appeal to the Judicial Council and get him reinstated. They even had to pay my fees. And then they made a rule that the Judicial Council can't award fees. I call that the John Gray rule. But those are instances in which I felt I had the opportunity to serve the church. And I could not say anything other than send me. Here I am.
But Judge Gray, I think that is showing how we live out the Charter for Racial Justice. Is that it's not just one thing, it's a collective body of when we have people in our denomination or when we have people in our group that is trained, skilled, and ready to stand before the body and say, this is wrong. And then that's where we as Black Methodists for Church Renewal individuals come behind you and be of support. I can remember distinctly receiving the phone call about Bishop Bledsoe. Mm-hmm. And then once again, I said, who is at the table with Bishop Bledsoe? They said, retired Judge John. I said, say no more, because I know your heart. I know your passion. I know you know the history, and you are phenomenal at your work. So I told the people in the South Central, sit back and watch and wait for the verdict, because I know what will take place. We can even go back to 2012 in Tampa. We're not going to bring that up, that whole thing in regards to what happened at General Conference. But see, what I have learned and why I love the Charter for Racial Justice, because it gives everybody insight into people of color being smart, bold, and intelligent, in which they think because we were in the Central Conference and then we're brought into the mainstream, we won't have the connections, we don't have the relationships, but we still do. And that's why it's so important that the Charter for Racial Justice is always brought up and it's lived into, and now more than ever, it's important. And I always share to take the Charter for Racial Justice along with End Racism by Discipleship Ministry and work that and use that together, because it's long-standing. Yes, we have made inroads, but we have a lot more roads to cover and territory to make level playing field. Thank you.
Let me mention one kind of footnote to leading up to 1968. A lot of the older preachers and lay people in the central jurisdiction were very leery about letting go of that. One of the reasons is that, we're comfortable with what we know. There was a great deal of uncertainty as to what it meant. Some felt that we would never be able to elect a Black bishop, or we would never be able to become district superintendents or heads of agencies. And so they wanted to hold on to that assistant head of agencies for what was called Negro work at the time. They wanted to hold on to that because it was certain. It was what they knew. But the fear of being unrepresented in this United Methodist Church denomination has proved to have been unfounded. We have elected bishops, Black bishops. We've elected Latino and Latina bishops, Native American bishops, Asian bishops, and at least from that standpoint, it's been probably a lot more glorious than anyone ever imagined before it began to happen. But from the very beginning, as we move forward in this United Methodist Church, in fact, the first bishop that was elected in the United Methodist Church was a Black bishop in Northeast jurisdiction. And I have to believe that that will continue. We have people who have been general secretaries of general boards and agencies, who have been high-ranking staff people on general boards and agencies. And so there are opportunities for participation within the denomination for those who want to extend themselves beyond the local church. I happen to be interested in a lot of this stuff. I mean, there are people who sit next to me in church who, all they want to do is come to church. And that's the extent of it as far as they're concerned. But we need lay people, especially need lay people who are willing to offer themselves for service on conference boards and commissions, district boards and commissions, and of course, general church boards and commissions as well. because that's where decisions are made for the whole. And my hope is that people will begin to take more of an interest. And I'm proud to say again, in my church, our what's it called now? United Women in Faith. Our United Women in Faith group is active with district and conference units of United Women in Faith, and they hold leadership positions and committee chairs and the like. And if we want to make this church what we want it to be, we have to participate where decisions are being made. We have a long way to go, and with all the work on racial justice and implicit bias that our conference has done over the past 2 years. There is still not a Black person on the conference staff. And, there are a number of reasons for that. But I always want to eliminate the fact that, well, we don't have a Black person on because we haven't been aggressive enough in recruiting a Black person to be on the conference staff. So we need to be there. We need to be at the general church level. We need to be at the district level. And of course, the organized unit is the local church. We definitely have to be active in the decision-making process that goes on in our local churches in order to move the cause of Christ forward. I think Dr. Richards had to go line the family up. She's coordinating a memorial or a funeral service at St. James today. But I wanted to make sure that if anyone had a comment or a question that they wanted to share, I see a comment in the chat. I'll call a name if I have to, but don't make me do that. All right, I'm going to call the name of Jim Coleman. You had a comment in the chat. All right, I guess he's not going to unmute. Here's something that.
Oh, John, can you hear me?
I can hear you. There you are.
Yes, just thank you for all your work and your parents. Is that film still available?
All right. He's talking about there were a series of there were two. And the answer is yes, it is still available. There were a series of CDs, and I'm blanking right now on the name of it. And there was how far back it goes, it was in VHS, that talked about Missouri Conference specifically. And oh man, I can't think of the names of either one of them, but excuse me, that they are available. And I have shown those a lot of times at churches during Black History Month. And they're unique. There are 5 CDs in the set about the general church. It's done by region of the country. So therefore there's a preliminary part that's the same in all 5. And then the second part of all 5 is unique to a certain segment of the country. But the other one talks about Missouri's experience specifically. And I'll have to find that and figure out how to make that generally available. It was originally, as I said, in VHS, but it got converted. I still have them. I'm not sure where they're lodged on the internet. They got to be on the internet somewhere, but I'm not exactly sure where they're lodged. The group of 5 that I talked about were narrated by Hilly Hicks. some of you who are my age and older may remember Hilly Hicks was an outstanding United Methodist layman. He passed away, I think, last year, but he was one of the recurring characters on Hogan's Heroes, and he was part of United Methodist Communications when his acting career was finished. So I'm always, when I saw that he had passed away, I remember that he had narrated those 5 CDs. But the one you're talking about is one that was unique to Missouri. And the conference website might have it archived on there somewhere. But if your church or any other church wants to see those, you don't have to wait till Black History Month. I can help you find them because we need to learn and understand more about not just our church that we attend each week, but other churches with whom we have a connection, and that includes the white churches. That includes the Kuamba. There was an article in this month's United Methodist or Missouri Methodist magazine about Kuamba that is over there in the old Wesley Heights building on Van Brunt, primarily an African congregation. The Korean congregations that we have here that are sharing facilities with other churches. The Hispanic churches that we have, predominantly Hispanic churches that we have a lot over in Kansas City, Kansas, to learn more about those and to be in relationship with them. I can say, going back to my childhood again, is one thing that I missed about the Central West Conference is that there was more sharing of worship experiences between churches. And now sometimes we're rigidly confined by state lines. There was an event that was going to be at St. James last year, and I suggested, well, why don't we include Mason Memorial over in Kansas City, Kansas, just across the river? And the first thing that was said was, well, they're in Kansas. Well, yes, they're in Kansas, but they're also part of us. And so it was possible to fellowship with other Kansas churches on some things, but for some reason it was not possible to fellowship with Mason Memorial, which was, really, they were part of where we could go when we couldn't go anywhere. If you understand what I'm trying to say, we could always go there, and they could always come to us, even when hotels wouldn't take them, or that tall steeple church on that wide boulevard wouldn't take them. They could always come to us. We could always go to them. And so I think some of that has been lost. Some of the fact of knowing people from other churches in other parts of the denomination, well, we don't have that so much anymore. Black Methodist for Church Renewal has probably become the gathering place of choice, and the same is probably true with some of the other ethnic caucuses of our church. Marcha for the Hispanic Americans, the Korean church, and the Native American church. They all have advocacy groups because we all have unique issues with respect to how we relate to this larger church. And our issues, no one's going to advocate for our issues but us. And so therefore, it's essential to continue in fellowship with churches of not only our ethnic group, but churches across the entire connection, because one of the reasons we pay apportionments is because we are connected, or we aspire to be connected. Some of the apportionment money supports Wesley Theological. It supports Crusade Scholars. It supports disaster relief through organizations like UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief, that really goes all over the world trying to respond to human and natural disasters. And so that's the sum and substance of what I came to talk about today. I thought it was important to talk about the backdrop of where this Charter for Racial Policies that eventually became the Charter for Racial Justice came from, and the entire setting out of which it came, the obstacles that were faced by many people of goodwill to bring about another step on the road toward inclusion. And we're still on that road, but we've passed a number of mileposts at the same time knowing that there are many miles left to go. Ms. Hutchinson, that's all I got.
Well, thank you so much, Judge Gray.
If anyone has any comments or questions, I encourage that. But
Very good.
That's my presentation.
We appreciate it. If you do have any questions, Jim or Leanne, Victoria, I see you're still on with us. Please unmute and take the opportunity to ask your questions. If not, that's okay too. Thank you again, Judge Gray, and also thank you to Dr. Yvette Richards for hosting us today, helping make this happen this morning. It's been a very insightful couple of hours, and we do appreciate you so much.
Yeah, she's got several jobs today, so
she sure did, and we appreciate her making it all happen.
I think she's lining the family up right now.
Yes. So it's been a joy to share this time together. I do want to highlight the next course, which will be December 9. And actually, Dr. Yvette Richards will be leading that. She'll be talking about John Maxwell 101 Leadership. So I'll include the registration link when I send out the webinar recording for today's course next week. Everyone can look for that in their inbox. And with that, again, thank you so much. We enjoyed it. We appreciate it. And peace and blessings to all.